just because J.D. Vance said that the assassination attempt, which is a horrific and heinous act, I believe I've read it reported as being investigated as an act of domestic terrorism, it is, at a minimum, a horrible security failure. If we can't protect the most powerful Republican in the country, I'm not sure how we convince foreign leaders to come. I mean, it's a horrific story, but there is absolutely no evidence that it has anything to do with anything President Joe Biden said or did, or anything that's been in the media that hasn't surfaced as a part of this story. And I wonder, I worry, I guess, and I'm sure Katie's simply reporting what she's hearing, that some of that disinformation is calcifying, at least in the room.
Yeah, it is. First of all, political violence is evil. And everyone I know who is not a Donald Trump supporter feels very strongly about condemning this violence. There is no one in the Democratic Party that thinks this would be anything other than an awful stain on our country and our ability to conduct free and fair elections. So having said that, I think it's really interesting that he picked J.D. Vance, because if this was going to be a moment where Donald Trump, because he came so close to a brush with death, that he was going to somehow pivot to a softer, more unifying message, then it seems to me he would have reached out to one of the many candidates for vice president that would have done what Katie referred to, and that is open the tent flap a little, let a few more people in, soften the edges. Instead, by picking J.D. Vance, who is a flamethrower, who is bombastic, who called Donald Trump cultural heroin 8 years ago, he has closed the flap, and they have now stitched it closed because they're not reaching out to a new group of people. And I think it's fascinating to me that he wanted someone more in his image, willing to say things, which I think was an irresponsible thing for J.D. Vance to say. That is not what the country needs right now. It needs everyone to say, let's quiet this down. Let's have policy differences. Let's don't make this something that stirs people's passions to the point that they take up a gun and try to kill someone. So I am not optimistic that we're going to see a pivot from Trump to a more unifying message, because if he was, he wouldn't have picked him. He wouldn't have picked J.D. Vance.
Well, and we also, like, at some point, if we're still looking for the pivot, the problem is us, right? I mean, Trump doesn't pivot. And I would say, just the cold, hard political calculation, if you look at where he is in the polls and you look at where he believes he'll be after that, I mean, the image of and thank God he wasn't injured in a manner that didn't allow him to walk off the stage, but the way he did it and the images that were captured are instantly iconic.
They are. So, look, first on J.D. Vance, I think you're already seeing the Biden team come out and say he's wrong on abortion services, reproductive freedom. He's wrong on health care, Social Security, January 6th, and protecting democracy. I think rather than flooding the zone with issues, the takeaway from the Vance announcement is that he's unqualified. It's a singular issue. He is unqualified to be president of the United States tomorrow. And where I think a conventional candidate, as Claire said, coming out of the events in Butler, Pennsylvania, would have selected somebody that could be president tomorrow, because that is front and center on the voters' mind now. You would have looked at a Burgum or a Rubio or a Tim Scott, or open up the process all over again. Donald Trump, having just narrowly survived an assassination attempt, is telling the country that he wants his vice president to be somebody that's wholly unqualified. A year in the Senate, that's it. And so on the issues, certainly it's going to be important to unpack Vance's record, but he's not qualified to be president. And I think he's opened up, Donald Trump has a vulnerability politically to the Biden camp. I also think, I don't believe we will see Donald Trump, be a unifying figure over the coming months. We've seen with our own eyes over the last 8 years. I agree with everything that's been said. The assassination attempt requires national condemnation, shared condemnation. It requires national reflection. It requires our national sympathy. But Donald Trump would be mistaken to conflate national sympathy with national support, because nothing about Butler, Pennsylvania requires us to suspend our judgment and suspend reality. which is Donald Trump is someone who tried to instigate violence to stop democracy 4 years ago. That he did that. And we can condemn both incidents. He's also somebody who has suggested he would use the levers of the presidency for retribution. We can talk political issues day and night. We can draw the contrast on fundamental rights and freedoms that we know he would roll back. But it is okay to recognize we are in a very pivotal moment where democracy was almost interrupted in Butler, Pennsylvania by a bullet. Democracy was almost interrupted on January 6th. We have also seen other incidents of political violence with different victims. President Biden tried to allude to those. And just speaking clinically, because we do need to be sensitive about the politics of the moment, I think for many voters who think we've got to get past this chapter of chaos, who do you think truly in their ethos might be more unifying going into the next 4 years? Is it the Donald Trump that we have seen, or is it the Joe Biden? Is it that Republicans want to paint Joe Biden's weakness as being the steady, aging hand? Mm-hmm. Perhaps that's now his greatest strength, that's exactly what the country is looking for in a moment of chaos. I think this is a rallying moment for Republicans, certainly. It should be for the country on issues of condemning political violence and on self-reflection, national reflection. I don't think it's the unifying political moment that Republicans hope it is. We'll see.
It is interesting and important that everyone is, I think, shaken by how close this was. It is also our job to point out the difference in the response when Paul Pelosi was bludgeoned with a hammer. There was not a universal condemnation of that act of political violence.
No, in fact, there was an incredibly unfair attack on Paul Pelosi personally and on the Pelosi family. He was dragged through the mud, and allegations were made and repeated by people in responsible places that
Ex-President's son, Don Jr., had some hideous.
And they made jokes about it. So listen, there is a temptation to do finger pointing, and that's politics. There's a lot of finger pointing in politics, but I do not think the American people believe for one moment that Joe Biden was responsible, by and large. Now, the Trump loyalists may believe this, that somehow Joe Biden was responsible for this happening. What this really is a hardening of our politics, a coarseness of our politics. And I got to tell you the truth, I honestly know we can lay more of that at the foot of Donald Trump than we can of Joe Biden.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.